So today I get to talk about one of my favorite topics with one of my new favorite humans. So Jacob McEwen is back on the show to talk about his recent experience with psychedelic integration training. So this has been something that, I personally been looking into for a number of years. And Jacob and I, the last time he was on the show, kind of talked a little bit about his interest in wanting to find a training. And so today we're going to talk about the training experience that he went through, how that's been able to layer into his current practice as a therapist, but also talk about a little bit about the just psychedelics in general, like where this is going, where it's been, how it's impacted our lives, from ketamine therapies to MDMA to macro dosing with psilocybin to microdosing. There's a lot of different information out there about these medicines, which used to be considered drugs, and the efficacy of how they can help us. So today we're talking to Jacob about how he is approaching this new information that he's now trained in, how he can hold that space, and some of the details that go in around ketamine therapies or psychedelic therapies. So it's a lot of information. I love talking with Jacob, so we have a beautiful, tangential conversation. I really hope you get something out of it. We'll see you on the other side. But first, this message. No matter how much we prepare, the holidays tend to stress us out. So this year, take a moment to reset and recenter with a grounding retreat in Costa Rica. Join Jeff Hawkins, Steve Wimmer, Cameron Nagashima, and myself, Adam Reel, for a one-week immersive yoga retreat at Blue Osa Resort, backed up to miles of pristine beach. Every day you'll have an option to experience yoga, meditation, relaxation, self-discovery, adventures, or your own personal free time. This is a time to build your peaceful practices before you need them. Take this time for yourself. Visit GarudaWellness.com for details. We have pricing options available, and if you pay in full by July 1st, you receive a 20% discount. Through the experiences offered, there's a lot of different ways to build your practice and approach this retreat. Take time to create space for yourself so you can hold space for others. Reset and recenter. Visit GarudaWellness.com for more information. That's Garuda, Garuda, Wellness, WELLNESS.com. GarudaWellness.com. And now an uninterrupted podcast with Jacob McEwen. All right, welcome back to our show. Today I'm welcoming back Jacob McEwen. Jacob's been a guest on the show before, and so get into his accolades real quick. LMFTA, psychotherapist, super interesting guy. Please check out the previous episode we did. And, Jacob and I have been chasing each other in each other's schedules for a couple months now, trying to nail this down. But it worked out serendipitously because Jacob just finished his psychedelic integration training. And that's something that I've been looking into myself personally for a while. And Jacob and I have actually, gone back and forth on, advice for different schools and different modalities to approach and stuff like that. So I always love meeting fellow psychonauts and, people that just love to explore the new, not really new, but, the newer accepted modalities of exploring that. And you dove in, man. You dove in and you did the training. I'm super excited to talk with you. So first off, Jacob, welcome back. I know you got a busy ass day, and I really appreciate you taking some time out to talk with us, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's like you, I love talking about this stuff, and I feel like my very, very small circle of friends is probably tired of hearing me talk about it so much. So.
That's why I started the podcast.
This makes sense to me now.
Right? You get enough people rolling their eyes at the weird shit that you do. You're like, you know what? I should expand my reach a little bit. Maybe I can at least not see the eyes being rolled at the stuff that I'm talking about.
Yeah, precisely.
But so you did it, man. You did a psychedelic integration training and ketamine assisted psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's okay. So I'm sure we got a lot to talk about. But where are you okay with talking about, like the school that you went to, or do you want to leave names out of it, or how do you want to approach this?
Yeah, no, I feel like I'm a full transparency sort of person. So yeah, I guess just to kind of get into it a little bit, because I feel like we kind of brushed against some of kind of like tiptoed into like psychedelics land in our last podcast, and I was like, hey Adam, like I don't actually have anything that says that I can legally, like ethically talk about these things, so maybe let's pedal back.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that last one we cracked the door. This one we're just fucking kicking it
we're
open.
gonna we're gonna rip that veil. Yeah.
There you go.
So I was able to connect with this organization called Journey Clinical. Journey Clinical is a online ketamine prescriber. So essentially like an online psychiatry, like med prescribable med management situation that specializes in ketamine. Uh, so what they are doing is they are essentially networking with therapists across the country, and depending on the state and what the legislation and the like legal picture looks like there, um, to deliver ketamine assisted psychotherapy. Um, so I kind of, I mean, once again, full transparency, like I've been doing some of this sort of work already,
Right.
right? Prior to receiving my license and prior to kind of doing the grad school thing. So for me, it was this weird situation where I was like, all right, like I know so much
Mm.
about all of these things. And also, like, I have to go through some formal training to be able to actually deliver this in an ethical, legal way to my clients and
Mm.
have them be protected legally and ethically, and myself as well, right? So I reached out to this company and they were like trying to find therapists. And I was like, hey, like, this sounds amazing. I would love to be able to connect my clients with a ketamine resource. I'm not trained. And they were like, well, sir, that is no problem because we have our own internal training program designed by Fluence.
Okay.
So Fluence is actually a very reputable organization that creates like a very robust psychedelic training program. They also have medicine-specific programs for like ketamine, MDMA, psilocybin. So it was kind of a slick opportunity for me because a lot of these trainings are thousands and thousands of dollars.
Right.
Um, so it was kind of like a supply and demand situation almost. Like they need therapists who are trained in psychedelic assisted therapy. So they needed to kind of provide the training for that to happen, right?
Mm.
So that they can kind of get their product out. I mean, also, I guess if you're hearing a little like skepticism in my voice, like I should note that my previous career was 4.5 years doing search engine optimization at a digital marketing startup. So I'm well versed in venture capitalism and startup culture.
Right. Yeah.
So I was like, oh, okay, like I'm just going to kind of weasel my way in here and get this pretty in-depth training just as a part of like kind of being a part of their marketing strategy, I guess.
All right.
So, hey, works
Hey,
for me.
take your windows where you can, man. Right? Yeah. Hell
Hey,
yeah, man. I feel
you
that.
know, so yeah, I went through the training and it's, I guess, just to start, like ketamine is an interesting drug or medicine.
Right.
It's very different than if anybody's tried, you know, traditional psychedelics, more like LSD, psilocybin. It's essentially an anesthesia,
Right.
right? It's on the World Health Organization's list of, you know, necessary medicines. Every, you know, EMT has it in their bag. It's super, super common, but it's a dissociative.
Hmm.
That's really its primary effect. So when people take acid, when people take, you know, mushrooms, you will often have those kind of those dissociative elements of that experience, but that's, in at least my experience, that is not the full of it, right?
Right.
There's a lot more going on there.
Hmm.
Whereas this produces almost kind of like that out of body dissociative near death experience for folks, which in a lot of ways makes sense. because the mechanics behind ketamine is a lot different in that it's kind of in a way disconnecting that default mode network in that brain, just kind of that thing that's always running
Right.
from kind of the embodiment experience. And it's almost like, hey, we're gonna like these wires are all tangled and messed up. We're gonna kind of disentangle these for a little bit for
Yeah.
about a couple hours, let these systems, which have their own logic, kind of self-correct, and then we're going to bring them back together, and they're going to fit together better, smoother, run cleaner as a result.
Right.
Um,
And that's the difference between ketamine therapy and doing Special K is the the rewiring afterwards. And it's funny because somebody asked me a number of years ago when ketamine therapies were starting to get popular, or at least I started to hear about them a couple of years ago. And
mhm.
I remember somebody approached me, and it was right when I started back in my psychedelic journey, like as an adult, as you know, like an intention as a medicine, not just like take a fistful of mushrooms and watch the wall for a couple hours. And I remember somebody asking me, they're like, "Hey, well, ketamine therapy, blah blah blah," and I'm like, I've done Special K many times off the back of a toilet in a nightclub. I've never done a ketamine therapy, right? And
Yeah.
it's very different, but it kind of leads to what you mentioned earlier about medicine versus drug, right? Medicines have a dosage. Drugs, like I just took as much as I could, right? There wasn't really a dosage. There was maybe a starting dosage, but then it was just like, okay, well, how much acid can I put in my face between midnight and 4 in the morning? Okay, cool, 20 hits. Here we go, right? There wasn't like a methodology
Yeah.
to it, right? Whereas now, with mushrooms, with ketamine, with MDMA, it's finding that dosage that works with the person to keep them within this state, not letting them get too far out with the disassociativeness like ketamine, but
Mhm.
also letting that kind of letting that disassociation happen to an extent, so you can almost be that observer looking at yourself being the person instead of like totally immersed in the thoughts and immersed in the story that you're telling yourself.
Yeah. And the weirdest thing going through this training that just kind of like kept, like, it kind of became the brain worm coming out of it is that the effects of psychedelics in these like different mental health categories like PTSD, depression, anxiety, they can't like the benefit of them can't really be removed from the subjective experience.
Hmm.
So there is almost like it is a necessary condition that somebody has that psychedelic experience for them to actually experience the healing that comes from those
Right.
things. Like you can't just because like okay, so if you gave somebody a bunch of atypical antipsychotic like Zyprexa or like Risperdal, and then gave them 3 grams of mushrooms, like the mushrooms are in their body, it's working, all that serotonin is being released, and also they're not going to go. And as a result of them not going anywhere, the medicine's not going to have the effect.
I'm really interested that you brought that up because, and not to cut you off and not to like jump forward because like I had this on my list like down the road, but I'm trying to find the podcast. Okay, so I listened to a podcast just the other day with a guy named David E. Olson. He was the guest on there, and the podcast was talking about psychedelic assisted therapies and the benefits for them with ketamine, psilocybin, things like that. But the interesting way that they were approaching it. So this guy David Olson is part of a corporation of sorts, and their focus right now in their research is to provide the therapeutic experience without the psychedelic experience. So basically, they're taking psilocybin, stripping away the hallucinogens, which is basically a neurotoxin. Basically, it puts us, it is a toxin, right? That's what kind of
Mm-hmm.
activates our body into the hallucinations and things like that. But that's, in my opinion, that's part of the medicine. And I can tell you, when I first heard this guy talking, I was very triggered of like, no, 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 you can't fuck with nature. You can't do that. That's like part of the journey. But then I started thinking about ketamine, MDMA, things that we have actually created, that have the assistance that we kind of need. So, my knee jerk reaction was get fucked. No, don't fuck with it, right? But as I started, sat and thought about it, I'm like, well, the more people it can help, the better. But then again, the more I think about it, it's like when we've synthesized nature in vitamin form for a number of years now, right? And it doesn't match up the actual plant version, right? So if I take a synthetic form of holy basil or I take the actual holy basil itself was going to, decalcify the plaque on my brain. It's going to help my cognition, but the synthetic part of holy basil might not have the full effects because we're recreating what nature already did. So to your point that you were getting like, how do you feel about taking the hallucinogenic experience away from the psychedelic experience? Because to me, that's part of it, right?
Hmm.
Seeing beings that I can't justify, being in a council of elders, surrounded, being berated by like these gods and goddesses, in a very real sense to me. And again, that's this is my experience. So
Hmm.
I've come to grips with these experiences, and I've learned how to integrate them, and I can understand how they can be jarring and they can be turned off on some people that might need the therapies. But to me, like, that's part of it. That's part of it is understanding there's a reality out there you don't understand and you don't have to understand. And that kind of helps us be empathetic, in my opinion, with other people. Is like, I don't understand your reality, but I get that you have your own, right? And so, just I guess, long-winded question is, how do you feel about removing the hallucinogenic experience from the psychedelic experience?
So I think there's this great quote. What is it? It's the dose makes the poison. Like
Ooh,
in terms of like how much, when is it medicine and when does it become poison?
right,
Usually
yeah,
it's the dose, right? So I am a big advocate of people microdosing.
same,
I think that microdosing is incredibly helpful, and I mean, you have all these people drinking like multiple coffees a day. You have people smoking a pack of cigarettes a day to get through the week. You got everybody on their SSRIs and all the things. Um, like I'll tell you right now, like microdosing psilocybin is going to be better for you in the long run than taking benzodiazepines.
right, yeah,
Um, at the same time, like if somebody is looking for some sort of major clearing of like negative energy or like traumatic suppressed memories, sort of those sort of things, like I don't know how you can do that work without the psychedelic element.
right,
So I think it's kind of like a both and for me there, where it's like, okay, I can see where, like the anti-inflammatory and the effects of psilocybin and the impacts that it would have on the peripheral nervous system for somebody with neurosis, that would be that could be life changing for them in their experience, right? And
right,
also, like, if somebody is dealing with some deep demons and trauma and stuff like that, like, they're going to need to go somewhere to take care of that.
right.
On top of this, I think we might have talked previously about ABE and brainwave entrainment.
A little bit, but yeah, please touch on it again.
Okay, so essentially, the theory behind brainwave entrainment is that the different mood states and kind of mindsets that we move through in the day are associated with different frequencies of EEG brainwaves. And if you actually expose somebody to those same frequencies, so example, alpha wave is between 8 and 12 hertz. So if I had a light flashing at 10 hertz and you were to just be staring at it, ultimately, if we were measuring your brain activity, we would see 10 hertz begin to strengthen inside of the brain.
Okay.
So, audiovisual entrainment is using lights and sounds that are at those very specific frequencies associated with those different mind states to essentially encourage an individual's brain to enter into that state. So, in the past, um, neurofeedback has been used, as particularly alpha theta training has been used to reprogram people's subconscious,
Okay.
essentially get them into an alpha theta state where they're kind of in this hypnotic twilight state and essentially kind of do manifesting sort of stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
If we're being honest, if you were to read the protocol, it's like visualize your brain, imagine your it's tomorrow is a new day. Like, what's different? Like, how are you gonna? It's kind of bizarre to look
Yeah.
at.
Huh.
uh, so I guess getting into my like little other side experiments here, what I've done is I've used audiovisual entrainment technology and actually put people into that alpha theta state. Yes, I'm going to get a little woo here. I actually use the Schumann resonance.
Okay. Can you explain that real quick?
Yeah, so the Schumann resonance is the resonant frequency of the surface of the Earth and the atmosphere.
Okay.
So the foundational Schumann resonance is 7.83 hertz.
Okay.
Weirdly, 8 hertz is the line in brainwave frequencies between conscious awareness and subconscious.
Hmm.
So when you are feeding somebody that 7.83 hertz, you're essentially giving them a frequency that is just slightly below conscious awareness.
Okay.
And when I have given people this protocol, essentially, it's like 30 minutes, 40 minutes under these little, they look like pit viper sunglasses, honestly. They have little LEDs and you put some noise canceling headphones on. And so it'll flash and it'll play kind of a binaural soundscape music that's got that Schumann frequency in the background there. And then we'll take those glasses off of them, the headphones, and have people coming out and saying, where did I go? I have people being like, I saw a relative that passed away. I have people questioning their faith as a result of that experience. And then going out and like coming back and being like, wow, the last week of my life has been like so radically different. I felt so calm and all these things. So this is almost the opposite, right? Where there's no pharmaceutical involved.
Right, yeah.
There's no substance involved. The only thing that's present is that subjective experience of, being out of bodied or kind of like entering that observer state or maybe having some sort of transcendental sort of effect. And that is having major impact on these folks and their neuroplasticity.
Wow.
So
that's interesting. I'm just started a book recently. I think it just came out, but it's called I might butcher the title, but I think it's called Brain Magic: The Neuroscience of Manifesting. This guy.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, right. I think his name is James Doty is the guy that wrote it, or one of the guys that wrote it. But yeah, it sounds like it's talking a lot about what you're mentioning, right? So we induce these brain states of of openness and kind of like slide some subconscious messaging in right underneath the radar, right? I mean, when we're in that manifesting stage, and when we can get good at that, and that's what this book talks about. It's like the brain is wired for this shit, right? We're just not doing it right? And even if we think we're doing it wrong, we actually are very good at manifesting. It's just we're focused on negative shit for the most part. And so negative shit keeps fucking happening. And so if that could be your barometer of like, man, I keep thinking about negative shit and negative shit keeps fucking happening. Hey, guess what? You're good at fucking manifesting. Change your fucking perspective, right? Think about some good shit. Do some happy stuff, right? Just, retrain. I know it's not that fucking easy, but it can be if you really look at it and say like, if I really think this negatively about life and life is perceiving as this negatively, switch the script, man, because you're good at this shit, right? So to try a positive outlook, right? To see how that works out, right? Because I think that's the message. Like we're really good at this. It's not an atrophied muscle. We're focusing on the wrong aspect of
it. I totally agree with that, and there's a very real. It's almost there's a real sadness in me actually about having not understood exactly what you're saying right there. Like growing up, like I wish somebody would have been like, "Hey, by the way, like." It's kind of weird, but like the way you think about things is actually going to have a bigger impact on the outcome than you could ever imagine.
Right.
Like so many of us are floating around in this kind of like victim drone-ish mindset. And well, of course, right?
Right.
Like
Yeah.
that's what you're see, that's what you're looking for. That's what
Yeah.
you're prepared to think about.
Well, there's a a kind of a reoccurring topic that keeps coming up on the show throughout multiple guests, like unscripted, unintended, is that need for the rites of passage, right? What are these things that, and it not like a like, oh, you've delineated this mark and now you become a man, a woman, whatever you recognize as, but like, but what is we as elders, what knowledge do we impart down on these children that are growing up? And I think that's one of those things. It's like, finding the ways to get out of your own fucking way, right? You're born with the best medicine, right? Our breath. So how do we integrate breath work into an early childhood development stage to where you can up and down regulate your nervous system from your own fucking breath and learn that you are your own healer, right? How can you learn that your thoughts are really fucking powerful, right? And so it's like I keep taking these notes. Maybe one day I'll do something with it. But all these like beautiful people like yourself have, these things that they talk about that can be that that wisdom that's imparted into whatever culture that they're a part of, to say like, hey, look, like balance your checkbook, whatever, make sure you do smart banking decisions, whatever, fucking who cares, right? But hey, guess what? You're a powerful human being just as you are. So let's learn how to utilize the power that you have in a responsible way so that you can get yourself out of shit and maybe hold space for some people that don't have that right now.
Man, amen, brother.
Maybe I'll start a whole nother podcast on just like, rites of passage. We'll just talk all about that shit.
Well, and kind of going back to that subjective experience, and like you described, that you had that beautiful image of kind of the dancing goddesses and like the ancestors, right? I think there's an element here of pressing up against the boundaries of what we're comfortable with and what we understand and know. And I think that whenever we do that, there's fear that comes up.
Right.
And there's something to be said about going through something like a psychedelic experience or going through some ritualistic rite of passage where you suddenly are kind of thrust into this new way of being and knowing that's hitherto unknown to you, and you have to grapple with that fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And we live in a society where it's easy to know things.
Yeah.
Like I remember growing up, like if I wanted to know all of the things that I'm talking about right now, I would have been chilling in a library for a while.
Right. Yeah.
I would have been like, I would have had the Dewey Decimal System down. But as it is, it's like anything that just kind of floats into your mind, you can just kind of Google it and be like, oh, I know this now. Or,
right.
Like I've never been to Peru or done ayahuasca, but I know a hell of a lot about what's going on down in Peru with ayahuasca and what people are reporting and all those things, right?
Right.
And so I think there is like, we have kind of lost that great adventure, that kind of coming of age trial, stepping out into the unknown forest with like nothing but like a Bowie knife and then coming back with dinner for the village, like,
right.
Or dead, or you die.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's two bodies of research that I've been kind of interested in recently about DMT and our androgynous DMT. I want to get back to your psychedelic assisted therapies in just a second, but just want to layer this in real quick. So there's one study that I know the University of Michigan is doing, and so we know that we have androgynous DMT in our system. We think it comes from the pineal gland. We think that it happens in dream state. It activates more to help us get in those dream states and visualize and yada, yada, yada. One of the things that University of Michigan just found out within the past 2 years of doing this, I think it's a decade-long research program that they're working on, but they found that DMT in our system is actually much more present on a regular basis than we ever thought it was. It just metabolizes very quickly. So it's in our system, it's out of our system. It's in our system, and it's out of our system. So it's not the same level as, say, dopamine, serotonin, cortisol, but it's in that same ratio as the importance of those brain chemicals to make it now be considered a brain chemical, right? So it's like on that level of like cortisol and all that shit, right? Dopamine. So one of the theories that University of Michigan is working with is the active DMT in our system that is there on a regular basis in our waking state helps us decode the nonsense of the world that we can't physically or mentally understand. So it takes the energy layer away from it and it filters that shit out so we can actually see you as Jacob and that map of Idaho behind you and this computer in front of me and
Mhm.
not all of my ancestors doing some fucking war dance around me to hold space while I'm talking to you, right? That's fucking that's pretty fucking awesome to me, right? That our androgenous DMT, and this is the next thing that I want to just bring up real quick. So our androgenous DMT is filtering out the world that we see around us so that we can actually make sense of what the world is. Now, the other thing that I read, and now this isn't I don't remember the body of knowledge that this came from. This was an article that I read, and they were
Mhm.
theorizing that one of the causes or one of the adding factors for neurodivergence from ADHD to autism, Asperger's, the spectrum scales, could be an overactive amount of DMT in your system on a regular basis. So just think about all that DMT that's in your system that doesn't metabolize. So
Mhm.
if your metabolism system doesn't metabolize that DMT and it's constantly flooding your system, you're going to be in a constant dream state. So you think about that in nonverbal autistic children that
Mhm.
can't that to be fair, I mean, I've seeing some of these human beings in life and interacting with some of these human beings in life, I can honestly say that I've voluntarily put myself in a catatonic state that's not too far off of resembling what a nonverbal autistic human being might recognize as, right? Whether it's like so much hallucinogenics in my system that I'm just drooling in a corner, I can't really verbalize what I'm going, I can't don't have motor controls. Like I can
Mhm.
honestly say that I've again intentionally put myself into a catatonic state that resembles in my own version of what a non-verbal autistic person would go through. And so just to think that that's a theory right now that's being actively researched, that part of autism and part of the spectrum is the DMT being flooded in your system and not metabolizing properly and keeping basically these human beings in a very deep hallucinogenic state. That's a really that's a curveball I didn't see coming.
No, but it kind of it weirdly makes sense. I'm gonna have to process this for a
Right,
second. I'm
and
not
I
gonna.
want the listeners to know too, like, please don't take that as gospel. That was an article that I
Yeah.
read, and it was very intriguing to me, but I haven't had a chance to follow up. But even if that doesn't prove to be true, I love the fact that we're thinking outside of the box in this very big spectrum now to be able to look at some of the causalities of the human experience, right? Not that we want to fix
Well,
it, right? But just like what's going on back there? What's going on?
yeah. Well, and that's really lands for me in a weird way because kind of going back to the audiovisual entrainment stuff that I was talking about, what I've actually been doing is looking at like MRI and EEG research studies that have been done on folks who are using acid, using mushrooms, like using DMT to then see how I can kind of take basically use those EEG readouts as a means of reproducing that in an audiovisual entrainment environment. So it's like I know that like if I give somebody a bunch of theta waves and gamma waves at the same time, they're probably going to have something that they experience similar to like mushrooms.
Right.
Um, and what, but going back to this idea of like DMT almost actually like kind of being like this filter for the metaphysical. Um, I mean, when we have adrenaline in our system, it kicks our brainwaves into higher frequency, beta.
Right.
And when that happens, like our ability to experience nuance and kind of just chill out, like literally we kind of get tunnel vision.
Hmm.
It's the same thing that happens when people take Adderall. Just whoop.
Right.
So if DMT is kind of effectively like operating like that, except almost like in a spiritual capacity, like there's a precedent for that in the system because like even dopamine will kick you down into a theta state,
Right.
and then we're kind of just like chill out, right?
That's an interesting
So,
point. Yeah, most definitely.
huh? This might be a future podcast, Adam.
Yeah, I'll find the links and I'll send them over to you on a side note. Yeah, most definitely, man. Well, getting back to your therapy sessions or
Yeah,
your training. So we talked a little bit about the ketamine therapy, but you also did psychedelic assisted therapy or
yeah.
integration training. Now, did that mainly focus on psilocybin? Did it kind of touch on a little bit of like the DMT side of ayahuasca or the LSD or peyote or anything, or was it just maybe?
It was. I actually. So like kind of just touch on the ketamine before we leave it
Mhm.
behind. I'm with you where I kind of used to make jokes about it being a horse tranquilizer and like all the things, and like I'm like, you know, big pharma still getting their pint of blood out of this one.
Yeah.
How I feel about it. So the psychedelic integration training I actually really appreciated, and that was also provided by Fluence. They went into all of it really. So they talked about the history of just psychedelic research in the United States.
Wow.
They talked about Albert Schweitzer.
Hmm.
Yeah. They talked about Timothy Leary and Richard Alberts, now Ram Dass.
Right, right.
Like
Did they
you
bring
got
up
to hear.
the Bill W side of it, the Alcoholics Anonymous side of it?
Um, they did not mention that explicitly, but they did talk about the use of psychedelics in the treatment of substance use disorder.
Right,
Um,
yeah. That was I don't know if you know the story, and I just heard the story maybe a couple of years ago, but Bill W, the founder of AA, one of his actually the impetus of the treatment was that first step was I'm going to shove some LSD in your face and you're going to see God and you're going to understand why you need to live. And then from there we start the 12 steps, right?
yeah,
And so the very first step of AA was we're going to go see fucking God. We're going to take a bunch of acid and I'm going to hold that space for you. And Bill W was all about it, man. He was 100% in that shit. And then all of a sudden, Tim Leary and Ram Dass, like you just mentioned, tune in, drop it, or was it tune out, tune in, and drop out, or something like that. And they just like
yeah.
championed the idea of acid for everybody and scared the shit out of the government. They pulled the trigger, made it all illegal, classified it, basically with heroin, and it stopped all the research in the United States on a legal level, at least. And so Bill W had to pivot, and he kept the 12 steps, which is great, but he took out that pivotal, in my opinion, first step of like, sometimes we got to see past our own shit to see the reason why we're here. And for me, a face full of psychedelics does that. It shows me God. It shows me something outside of myself. It takes me outside of my own experience. So yeah, it's interesting. You're mentioning that there.
Yeah, the Bill W thing, that was really interesting. He was given that acid by this psychologist named Gerard Weeks,
Okay,
who is actually friends with Aldous Huxley over in England.
love that.
Um, but I don't know if you've ever, witnessed an AA meeting, but like the foundational aspect of that entire process is what's your higher truth? Like
Yeah,
what's your highest truth? You have to accept and commit to the idea that there is something bigger than you in this world
right.
that you need to orient your life around. And it's kind of crazy to think about that, because I'm right with you. Like that could have been a huge moment, I think, in substance abuse recovery. And unfortunately, it like took a very wrong turn with, I think, Timothy Leary kind of politicizing the whole psychedelics movement.
Yep.
But going back to that integration training, they actually talked a lot about ketamine research in Russia.
Hmm.
Apparently, there has been an enormous amount of ketamine research for substance use disorder in Russia.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because if you look at the clinical trials that we're doing here in the United States, it's very, I don't know, it's a very white coat. It's like, we are going to like measure like down to like the infinitesimалist amount of like ketamine and like or psilocybin, and we're going to be playing Bach, and we're going to like set very neutral expectations for what's going to happen because we don't want to oversell our product and get sued for it. Like it's like we're just going to like. Whereas in Russia, there's this guy Kravinsky who was essentially like, hey, I'm going to shoot you up with more ketamine than you should probably ever have. You're going to see God and it's going to fix you.
Right.
And his and and he was getting like, like over 75% of these folks are like, all right, I'm done drinking, like,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
So it's just funny to kind of see the different approaches in different places around how to do this work.
And that's honestly, I mean, we talked about this either on the last podcast or offline, but that's one of the things that's kind of turned me off about the whole like getting certified, right? And I get like doing it so you can help more people
Mhm.
and certified so you don't get arrested and yada yada yada, insurance and all that stuff. But man, like there is something to be said about like just taking a shot, gonna go just like sit with 5 grams of mushrooms and just see what the fuck happens, right? The setting's good, right? But like a lot of times, some of the feedback I've gotten from people that have done like ketamine assisted therapies or even psychedelic assisted therapies in a clinical setting is they feel like they're in a clinical setting, and that can be really off putting for somebody that's going through a psychedelic experience. Maybe if you don't have a previous experience, maybe it can be comforting. But if you've done it before in a safe way, and you maybe even had like what people consider a bad trip, but not all of them,
Yeah.
sitting in a sterilized room on a bed with a big stethoscope, light over me in a very doctor clinical setting might be triggering to me in
Yeah.
my personal experience more so than like sitting in a rice hut on a fucking mat on a dirt floor, covered in a blanket, just huddling in the corner, shaking back and forth until everything starts to wear
Hmm.
off, right?
And that's kind of the hurdle here, right? Like, because I'm with you. Like, the best work that I've ever done happened like up here in the woods, you
Right.
know? Um,
You and fucking
so
nature just doing it out, man.
yeah, so like and then you're like, okay, like we're gonna walk you into this like fluorescent lit space and like set some vibes or whatever. But just trying to make it much more human and organic and
Yeah.
like less clinical, I think is a huge thing. Because yeah, there are those folks who they do want they do want somebody who's like smells nice and is well dressed and like has like the letters after their name and like
Right.
there's a great parking lot in front. They want all of that stuff to feel safe. And also that's not always where the best work happens.
Right. Right. But I think to your point too, there's a good friend of mine. She's been on the show a couple times, but her name's Leonora Russell, and she was one of the founding or one of the people that was really integral in decriminalizing plant medicines about 2022 in the Washington State. But the way she did it was very very interesting, and that's one of the reasons I brought her on the show. Is she saw the benefits of psychedelics, right? Just across the board, doesn't matter what you recognize as gender wise, political wise, all that shit, right? It's a helpful medicine, but there's people like you and I that will be like, yeah, cool. Yeah, no problem. Like, we're all about that, So she started 2 groups, one called the Entheogen Society. And the Entheogen Society, entheogen is like taken from, Greek terms or Latin terms. Entheo is like brain expansion, stuff like that, right? So entheogen is a term that you and I would get. People like you and I, right? We take mushrooms, we take psychedelics, we're all about that life. So that website and that organization was created with like fractal art and Alex Gray kind of backings and all this stuff that like, psychedelic, like the Grateful Dead bears and shit, right? But then she created another society called the Adapt Society, and Adapt is an acronym for something I can't remember, but the Adapt Society was all the scientific research, the papers backing it. It was very white collar based, like, if you want to say right wing or, like whatever. But but by doing that, by splitting her resources and saying, okay, so everybody that needs to have legal representation of what they're doing, here is that. If you just like to look at trippy shit because you already do this stuff, here's that. Now, they're both saying the same information, but they're saying it directly to the person that's reading it. And by doing that, that was one of the big things that helped her, help the organizations decriminalize plant medicines. And so it's like, how do we meet the person with where they're at, right? The person that needs the cloak, that needs the, the white coat and the big fluorescent lights, got you, right? You're going to be safe. But the person that wants to like go sit with a cool ass fucking hippie shaman or whatever, right? And just be in the middle of nowhere for a little while and just see what the fuck happens. We got you too, right? It's however that needs to happen for you.
And that's like kind of the fun part of my job now that I get to do this sort of work is I feel like I get to be kind of like this like psychedelic spy in a way where I can kind of like I kind of like somebody will walk in and sit down and they'll like, oh, they're wearing a smoky quartz bracelet and have some mala beads on. Like, we're gonna get a little weird with this person versus like the person who comes in with like the Coach bag and like, the Tony Birch stuff. Like, it's like, oh, I'm gonna talk about like the scientific side of all this
Right.
with them.
Yeah, we're going to use vocabulary words with you.
But whatever it takes to help these folks understand, like, hey, this is medicine that's really going to help you.
Yeah.
Like, this is profoundly going to change your life, and you can feel safe and held by somebody who like knows a few things about this stuff, and let's get you on your way. Like, let's get you on your journey.
Yeah.
And I guess just kind of fold in, I guess, more of that training. That's one of the things that I really appreciate about them covering the different psychedelics that are currently being researched and offered right now, because they are different and they do impact folks differently. I think so. Like the ones that they particularly focused on were ketamine, psilocybin, and MDMA.
Okay.
So like right now, MDMA, I think, is in phase 2 or 3 trials. I'll Google that later. It's in trials. And that is likely going to be the next thing that comes through.
Yeah.
I think that folks who have experienced interpersonal traumas in particular have personal anxieties, social anxieties. Like, I think that MDMA is something that could be profoundly impactful to be held in a therapeutic space by somebody when you're having those overwhelming feelings of attachment.
Right.
I mean, that's incredible. And at the same time, for those folks who have trauma that results in all of this somatic symptomology, like chronic pain, any of that sort of stuff, like, I think psilocybin is your guy, like it's going to get in there and attack that peripheral nervous system and work some things out.
Yeah.
So being able to speak to, because the reality is when somebody's hurt, they start looking for their own healing, right? So I've had folks coming in and asking about these different things, even when I haven't been able to offer them. And it is, I think, valuable to not just be like, yes, a psychedelic journey could be great for you, but to be having a little bit more nuance and being able to say like, hey, like, this is how ketamine might affect you and particularly given your history, that might be a good thing or maybe not. Because it's also a shifting landscape.
Yeah.
These offerings keep changing, like, MDMA might just get walked through and suddenly it's like no big deal, right? Or maybe it gets walked through and they're immediately like, oh, actually, this is a horrible idea. And then suddenly psilocybin is available.
Right.
So just understanding that, like, you can't just swap out one psychedelic for another and expect to have the exact same result.
I think that's a really, really great message and strong, like, just make sure that people understand that, right? It's not like ibuprofen and Tylenol, right? Like, one can't really be swapped out with the other, even though they are very different, acetaminophen and
Mm-hmm.
But to your point, like, my most recent medicine that I've sat with on a hallucinogenic basis was psilocybin. So I've been sitting with that medicine now for about probably 7 or 8 years, and using that as that guide of like, let's get some shit out of the way. Let's understand my default mode network that I'm working on. Right? What am I always reverting back to in a very subconscious, non-wanting to way? Right? What's my dickish kind of like reversion? Right? because I can be a man. Oh man, I'm good at being an asshole, right? And that especially when you haven't been an asshole for a long time, there's like part of you that's like right at the skin, like ready to come out and like say the funny, seemingly funny, but also really damaging, quippy thing. Because like it's like I'm just ready to do it.
You got your knife sharp, yeah.
Yeah, totally. Fucking hell, man. But I'd been called to sit with ayahuasca for a number of years. I was doing my own research on it, was sitting with it because, like you said, right? Like I'm an addict, right? I'm an alcoholic. I've done a lot of drugs in my life, so I know that there's that side of my brain that's like, hey, there you go, just go into that different brain set, right? It's not therapeutic. It's just getting something different, right? Making the
Yeah.
brain feel something different, disassociating, if you will, right? So I got to be very cautious about my own personal proclivities and like understanding like that addict can sound really, really peaceful and really calm and be like, no, this is a great idea, Adam. Yeah, you should go expand your consciousness. So when I started to think about ayahuasca, it took me years, and I finally sat with it about 6 months ago, and
Oh,
it was completely different than what I envisioned, even though I was trying not to envision a way to do it, right? I guess part of me thought I was going to go sit in the rainforest in some fucking hut and sit with the shaman and do ayahuasca, right? And sit with ayahuasca. Well, I ended up meeting a Portuguese Christian church called the Santo Daime that
I've heard of them. Yeah.
right, yeah. So very, very legitimate. The DEA like ships in their
Hmm.
medicine. They sign it out to the churches. The churches are all over the country, all over the world, but legalized in the country. And I sat with this Portuguese Christian church and drank ayahuasca for 7 hours and sang Portuguese Christian hymns, and it was fucking crazy, man. It was an amazing experience, and I would definitely 100% do it again. Um, but it wasn't the way that I thought my experience would with ayahuasca would be. But that gave me an opportunity to look at and be like, oh, I had an expectation. Whether I realized it or not, I had an expectation. And so the reason I bring this up is that like I think part of me was just like, oh, this is a level up from psilocybin, right? When it's not really a level up, it's a different level, right? It's a different application, it's a different medicine, it's a
Hmm.
different way it's going to approach your body, it's a different way it's going to approach your nervous system. And so to just echo what you said, you can't just swap out one for the other, right? My
Yeah.
ayahuasca experience was very, very different than my psilocybin experiences have ever been. Not saying it was more or less intense, more or less visual, but I could tell having sat with psilocybin for that many years in that many sessions, I could tell the medicine of ayahuasca was familiarizing itself with me as much as I was familiarizing myself with it. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
giving me the full medicine because it wasn't sure of my intentions because I wasn't even sure of my intentions. But I could feel that dance going back and forth instead of like with psilocybin. Mama Mushroom is like, "Hey, what's up, Adam? How you been? We're gonna go for a ride. Whoop. I'm
Yeah.
just gonna envelop you in here." But it was interesting. We haven't brought this up yet, but just since we're on the subject of DMT, I did a darkness retreat recently, so I did 5 days in the
Yeah.
dark. And one of the body chemical side effects of being in the dark for that long, whether it's your your vision being impaired, or you don't have any photons touching your skin, also, is about I think it's 17 to 20 hours. The androgenous DMT in your body starts to overcreate, and you start to go into these deeper, potentially hallucinogenic opportunities for you. Um,
Mm.
Now, for me, that manifested in dream state, and so I don't. I know that I dream. I don't remember my dreams. I thought after I
Mhm.
quit drinking they would get better, but I still don't. But I'll wake up like physically just exhausted, like I've been like trekking through Mordor, right, in my dreams. So the third day into my darkness experience, so that I checked in Saturday. So Monday night when I went to sleep, I fell into like the deepest hallucinogenic, like fucking beautiful lucid dream experience that I've ever had without
Oh,
taking a substance in my entire life. And so that was like it was just so interesting to see that layer of DMT, right? That layer of a hallucinogenic. But the interesting thing
mhm.
about this was, so again, my familiarity with psilocybin, the number of times I've been with that medicine, I have familiarity with the some of the beings that I meet in those states now. So the interesting thing was as I was realizing that I'm in this lucid dream, in this DMT state now, and in the darkness experience. So quick story, just so I can frame it. So I'm like falling asleep, and all of a sudden this gold frame with a sledgehammer in the middle just pops up out of nowhere. And I'm like, at first I'm confused.
Okay.
I'm like, that's weird. I still don't know if there's a meaning to that. I've thought a lot about it in the past month since I've gotten out of that space, but like I don't know what the meaning is, but I could see it. And so after a second of like, what the fuck is this thing? The human side of me was like, wait, Adam, you're asleep and you can see things. That's fucking cool. You don't do that. And so like the active part of me was like, oh my God, I can see that. And I remember visibly, like I've just like 100% like it happened in real life. I remember saying like, oh my God, I can see that. And then all of a sudden I was in a movie theater and the movie screen was the gold framed sledgehammer. And about 10 rows in front of me, a being stands up and is like, hey, looks at me and was like, hey, you can see that. And I'm like, I can see you. And they're like, I can see you. And I'm like, oh my God, you're my guide for my psilocybin journeys. And the guide was like, yes, Adam, we're always here. So let's frolic through your dream state. Basically grabbed my hand and we skipped and frolicked for about 4 days through my dream state. Every time I went to sleep, I met right back up with him. We fucking would go through and do all
Wow.
this. And so it was so amazing to have that experience. But it was interesting to me, and I know it's all in my head and I'm, the creator of this, but it was interesting to me to have the guide show up, like the guide that I'm familiar with show up in these different medicinal states. And that, like, to me, it subconsciously showed me like that. So it's not a guide of medicine. It's my guides that are with me that maybe
Mhm.
I have more access to because I stop rationalizing shit when I have access to them in a more hallucinogenic state because I stop, justifying
Mhm.
humanity, right? And be like, oh no, that was the wind that opened that door or whatever, right? And so it was that beautiful reminder of like this person, this being is always with you. All right, you
Yeah.
can manifest them more in these hallucinogenic states, but you can also find a way to do it without. Right, so just like lean into these people because they're all around you. But man,
Mhm.
that was just a fucking cool experience, man.
Well, and yeah, I want to hear more about that at some point. And I mean, that really brings home for me, I think, like I did mushrooms are kind of my thing. Like I also have kind of thought about ayahuasca and doing that, but I'm just not really feeling called.
Yep.
Like I feel like maybe I'm kind of because I'm also an addict, so I'm also like, oh, is this just like the bigger, badder thing?
Right.
Like
Exactly.
I've gotten a lot out of my mushroom journeys and have done some just life changing stuff with that. And also, it's like it's old hat, right? So there's like that idea of like I want to work on maintaining right relationship with that medicine and like having that be like a organic and healthy part of my life,
Hmm.
rather than always like kind of like jonesing for that next
Right.
hit, right? Um, but a big, probably the most transformative thing for me in terms of all of the studying I've done on psychedelics, all of the plant medicine I've tried, was doing a breathwork session
Hmm. Wow.
because I had already done all those other things. And I was like, wow, like your mind is just a box of just mystery and magic, right? And I was like, and these medicines are like so important and so huge, like to access that. But then when I went and did breath work, I had one of my more profound, like transcendental experiences during that. And I remember sitting up and looking at the person I came with. It was just and just being like, that was stronger than drugs.
Right.
Like that was, and it just created this whole process in my mind of like, it's not so much about the substance, it's about just that ability to clear shit out of the way and focus on love and
Yeah.
experience love. Um, so whether that's a mushroom journey in the woods in Idaho or a ketamine experience in a clinic or, a breathwork class at Anamkara or a darkness retreat, like these visionary states are accessible. And sometimes people just need to like, they need to be at the gorge seeing Dave Matthews to give themselves permission to like, take that mushroom and like just let it out, right?
Right.
But at the same time, like the invitation's always there if we let ourselves get deep enough.
Yeah. That's man. Thank you for saying that because yeah, I can echo that. One of the most the pivotal experiences I've had, and maybe it's because I wasn't expecting it. Like if you take a bunch of mushrooms, you expect you're going to go somewhere, right? Things are going to happen, right? But I remember the first holotropic breath experience that I had. I was going with a friend. Hey, come with me, do the thing. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I ain't gonna do nothing tonight. So I went there, and I walk in this yurt, and there's a bunch of mattresses laid down in a circle and blankets on the mattresses. And I'm like, what kind of sex orgy did you bring me to? What the fuck is going on here? This number of years ago. And then we lay down and a little bit of instruction. This is how you breathe. We're going to play a bunch of fucking crazy ass music. You're going to breathe like that for 90 minutes or as long as you can. And my God, man, the places that I went just from that breathwork experience, no external substances, no cannabis, no psilocybin, no nothing, just me and my own damn breath. Motherfucker, man. Yeah, and it is that reminder, like, yes, there are things that can help you get there, but you can also do it all yourself. Like you mentioned, like AV entrainment. Like I think we talked about this on the podcast the last time you were on. Back in the days, the way they did that AV entrainment was they'd light a fire and put a wagon wheel in front of it and just spin the wheel, right? And then the way the wheel spun, the velocity, the speed, whatever it was, that's where that whole back and forth would go in your brain, right? Yeah. So like we've been doing this shit, like we're born with this shit, right? It's so funny to rediscover the stuff that's like ancient,
Well, and, why not? Let's bring in a Christian, right? C.S. Lewis like talks about how in Mere Christianity about how like that impulse and that drive towards the spiritual wouldn't be there if there wasn't a spiritual realm to experience.
Right.
Right.
There's a guy named Ben Greenfield who's actually out in the Spokane area. He runs a podcast and I think he's like a health and wellness kind of guy now. Written a bunch of books, but he talks about he did a podcast a number of years ago where he and some of the people that work for him broke down some of the compounds and the stories they used in the Bible, right? So let's take, back in the biblical days, there weren't a lot of windows in these houses that they were doing these ceremonies in, right? And the ceremonies, they burned a lot of sage, which is the cousin of marijuana. They burned a lot of frankincense and myrrh, which have really hallucinogenic properties when they're contained in the smoke, right? Now, on top of this is another layer so this is all Ben Greenfield stuff. This is all stuff that he's figured out. So another layer that he put on top of this was that during those times, cinnamon was a very popular spice. So a lot of people are using cinnamon in their cooking and their regular lives. So what we know about cinnamon now is cinnamon slows our metabolism down. So it keeps things in our system longer. So if you're eating a lot of cinnamon, you're not going to metabolize a lot of stuff, right? So think about if you're in a ceremony in an enclosed room with little to no windows, little to no ventilation, burning immense amounts of sage, immense amounts of frankincense, immense amounts of myrrh, and you have cinnamon in your system, which is holding all those toxins from being metabolized, you're going to start seeing a lot of shit, right? Yeah. You're going to start seeing burning bushes. You're going to start seeing spirits. You're going to start seeing a lot of this stuff that, it was theoretically unexplainable. These are acts of God, right? We call them. But in his research, and this is his findings, and it's just cool to look at this, these people were fucking tripping their asses off, right? They were very deep in these hallucinogenic states, seeing God, talking to spirits, understanding these different ways of living, and it's just, we're finding our own ways of doing that,
Well, I mean, and my little passion project here also, because like I grew up Catholic. I'm Irish Catholic, grew up here in Spokane, right? And so, I don't know, like I've had an interesting relationship with the historical figure of Jesus Christ.
Yeah. I like how you put that, the historical figure of Jesus Christ. I love that.
But it's been really weird to think about, okay, this man went and did a 40-day silent retreat in the desert before he started his public ministry. He was essentially like drowning people, bringing them up. I mean, you've done a cold plunge, haven't you?
Yeah, many. Yeah,
Yeah. You think that might like he's like resetting people's nervous systems like
right.
over and over again out there in like the Jordan, right?
Yeah,
And then I mean, and during this 40-day exercise in the desert, like that's when he has his big confrontation with Satan. He goes into a visionary state where he's like tempted and all these things, right?
hmm
And like even looking at some of the plant medicine stuff, like acacia wood, which grows through the Middle East, has DMT in it.
right.
Syrian rue, which grows through the Middle East, is an MAOI inhibitor. So essentially, you have the ingredients for ayahuasca in
Right.
the Holy Land.
Yeah, right.
I mean, shit, the Ark was apparently built out of acacia wood. So, I mean, we're like, how have we convinced ourselves? Like, I'm at the point now where it's like, how have we convinced ourselves that this wasn't happening back
Right.
then?
Yeah,
You know?
it's so interesting to see like, where the story shifted. There's an image I see in my head, and I've had like self-help coaches like walk with me on this, but it's basically like, so see your life is like going straight up, like 90-degree angle going straight up, right? You have your where you're at and your goal up here, right? Now, as you're going straight up, just think if you get like a half degree off, right? In the beginning, it's like that's not bad, right? But as
Mhm.
time goes by, that half degree is still a half degree, but it gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it's moving a half degree away from that 90-degree up, right? And so if we
Mhm.
just get a little shift off of the story or the understanding or the quote unquote reality that we're in, that over thousands of years, and what's religion like? What, 2 to 5,000 years old, depending on who you ask,
Yeah.
right? So over 2,000 years, that half degree is fucking a whole universe away now,
Mhm.
right? And so like, man, not that I say like put credence in every single story you hear, but like as I've gotten older and as I've gotten more experienced in life, and whether it's been through an experience of psychedelics or meditation or whatever it is, I don't know shit. And I'm okay with that. So like I'm at a point where like I might not put full faith in your belief system, but I understand that my ignorance is enough that I don't have enough proof to say you're wrong, right? But that being said, hey, you live your life, you do you. Don't hurt kids, right? Do the best you can. But like if that's your belief system, fucking man, have at it, because I don't know shit. I barely know that this color shirt that I'm wearing is black because somebody else might see it as fucking orange, right?
Yeah, and I think you just kind of circle back to the big thing there, like that idea of ritual and like kind of confronting and challenging the unknown and like, hey, I am outside of my element. I'm outside of my comfort zone. Turns out I don't know shit and I'm okay. I'm safe. I don't need to go to war. I don't need to build a moat. I don't need to like tell somebody else how to think or believe so that everybody's all on the same page. I'm okay. Like
Mm-hmm.
not knowing and just because guess what? Like that's part of the human experience, people. Like
Yeah.
I know that we have all these like little, supercomputers that we're running around with, but like that's knowledge is a false comfort in a lot of ways,
It really is. Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Well, with where you're at with the training that you've gone through, and the space that you can hold for people in a more legal way now, like
Mhm.
is there a type of client that you like have an ideal that you want to work with? Are you opening it up to kind of see what help you can offer in a broad spectrum?
Yeah, I have approached plant medicine pretty intentionally, wanting to work with folks who have experienced trauma, particularly religious trauma.
Hmm.
So questions related to spirituality and religion, I think, are often demonized in the therapy space.
Yeah.
Um, and that is, I'm trying to create a space for them in a lot of ways. And I think that psychedelics, just like we're talking about, it's kind of part of that experience. Like, I'll tell you, like, I have a friend that's grew up Pentecostal and they did not start and they totally went away from that. And they were totally opposed to any sort of like spirituality at all, just kind of like not shutting down the discussion, didn't really want to have anything with it.
Hmm.
Then they tried psychedelics and they were like finally ready to start. exploring some of those questions again. And I think it's in a weird way for them, it was like, it was an experience similar to some of those early church experiences of like people talking in tongues and like having these ecstatic like expressions, right? Except it was more like their direct connection with that, as opposed to that being filtered and mitigated by like somebody else or some preacher who may or may not be a good person.
Right.
So that's a big part of it. And then also childhood and developmental trauma. I think that a lot of disembodiment is the result of just unintegrated experiences from when we were younger. And it just causes us to not be able to check into our body or feel comfortable in our body.
Yeah.
So folks who have like done a lot of work but are still experiencing some of the somatic symptoms, I think that's a really powerful tool for them. And I haven't really pushed too hard on this population, but I am, I have all this training in existential philosophy. I've been starting to look into the death doula work.
Wow. Yeah. Big work right there.
Because I ultimately feel that the psychedelic experience and the experience of death are kind of the same thing. It's just we don't come back from that one.
Right. Yeah. And from my understanding, I haven't worked with anybody on this, but from what I've read, psychedelic assisted therapy is very, very helpful for people with terminal illnesses to help justify and understand, like, okay, no, I'm making my peace with leaving this world. I've released the attachments that I have, and it's really very helpful. So you're not white knuckling your death, right? It's like you're on your way out. There's no reason to cling, right?
No, totally. And I really was inspired reading The Psychedelic Experience that was authored by Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, that was based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Yeah. That was really one of the very first psychedelic books I ever read. Totally. Yeah, I get that. I think, your work with the idea with the church kind of rehab idea, I think is so beautiful, because it's like we don't realize how much power that, even if you don't recognize as a religious person, or you're not practicing, or you're atheist, whatever it is, there's still those overtones and that dialogue that's been, passed around now since I've been born, at least, about like, you can't talk to God yourself. There's got to be an intermediary. You got to go to a priest, a father, a pastor, a nun, a fucking father, whatever it is, right? You can't just talk to God. And that is complete bullshit, right? Have an orgasm. You're fucking talking to God, man. There's like, that's right there, right? Having these beautiful moments. Like if you look in the eyes of a child, and I know that sounds cheese dick and fucking weird, but like looking in the eyes of an innocent little newborn and just seeing the awe and the wonder, it's like, that's God right there, right? It's like, so like learning the ways of like removing this intermediary, because then to just tack onto your second point, that creates deeper intuition with ourselves and that deeper trust within ourselves, that I feel something and I can trust that feeling. Just because you don't experience my own personal feeling doesn't invalidate my feeling. Right. And so it's like, we're smart. We're fucking smart. The brain is not smart. Like if you even look at the research now, we get more information from our heart. It comes into our heart and then gets pushed either up to our brain or down to our gut, but it comes into the heart first. That's where the information happens, not the brain. The brain is like there's an ancillary, right? So it's like, listen to the way you feel. Like like when somebody says something, like, how does that feel within you? Right? There is an actual palpable feeling. And if you get used to the way that good resonates in your body, or what you feel bad resonates in your body, then, there's going to be missteps in the beginning, right? Because we're not understanding it. We got to figure this out. There's no blueprint to Jacob to say, like, this is where you feel good and this is where you feel bad. It's going to be different than the way I do it. But the more we can understand that God speaks through us, and we don't have to speak to somebody through somebody to God, then that reminds us that we're divine beings, and that if I ask a question and I get this weird rumbly feeling in my belly, maybe that's a fucking no, and I should maybe step back from this. But if I ask that question and all of a sudden my shoulders get all excited and my posture straightens up and I tuck my chin, it's like, oh, I'm ready to go. So clearly that's a yes.
Yeah. I mean, I just had this funny thought that popped into my head. It was like, yeah, I'm trying to decentralize the religious experience in a lot of ways.
I
Like,
love that.
I'm just a perpetual anarchist, I guess.
Hell yeah. Oh man. Well, everything else is being decentralized. Might as well decentralize religion too, you know?
I mean, it's been long, we should have done it a while ago, probably.
Oh man. So what is so what are your next steps with this this new knowledge base that you have and this excitement that I'm feeling from you?
Yeah, I I just opened up my Fridays.
Awesome.
I mean, essentially, that's kind of been the thing is I've been building a private practice. I'm just about at the point where I'm kind of full, I guess, with what my standard caseload, I guess you would say. But I'm working at a place in town called Anchor Counseling Services, and we've built out a space to actually do ketamine journeys with people there. So I haven't done the research. I think we might be the only folks doing it in town right now.
Awesome.
There's other practitioners doing ketamine assisted psychotherapy, but I think we're the only like group practice. So
Yeah.
just kind of, I'm. It's funny. I see so many people advertising like retreats and like journeys and like let me like bring psychedelics into your life. But even as a therapist, like I never operate under the assumption that I'm going to be the best therapist for every person in Spokane, Washington.
Right.
And I think that when it comes to plant medicine or just these psychedelic medicines and in general, if you let them come to you and let it be organic, it's always going to go better. I don't know what that is. So I'm just kind of like, I've listed that I do it on my professional profiles and added it to my bio, but I'm just kind of like, all right, universe, like, let them come.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm ready.
Yeah. And maybe we should have started with that message, but I'm so happy that you're bringing that message into it. It's take your ego out of this shit. Like just because some fucking famous person that you saw or you read some cool story and resonated with the experience of somebody else doesn't mean go out and do that thing, right? But that can be
Yeah.
your impetus to say like, oh, that sparked my interest. Let me do some more research, right? Like for me, for example, it took me 2 years to finally do a darkness retreat after I heard about it because I wanted to like make sure that it was right for me, right? And I wasn't like, skirting something. I was doing my dharma for whatever I needed to do. But that's different for every single person, right? And so again, like the initial excitement you feel from hearing new information, let that be the driver, right? And
Yeah.
sometimes it is a slam dunk. Maybe you've done your silent research about this, but take your time with this stuff, right? Because like as we mentioned earlier, a lot of us have addiction issues, whether we've faced them or not, whether we're aware of them or not. I mean, we all are addicted to our cell phones, right? And that's generational, that's gender, that's cross like everything, right? It doesn't matter where you come from. We're now addicted to our cell phones, right? So like understanding that addiction is a big thing. We can justify a lot of stuff just to get a high or get a fix or like whatever you need to do. But the lasting work happens when you do your own work and this becomes part of that work, right? This becomes a layer of you finding you, not I need to microdose every single day to feel like Adam. Okay,
Exactly.
now we're introducing a continuous crutch, which is basically what all the stuff is that we're trying to get away from right now.
Yeah. And I've started kind of using this phrase as like psychoventurism because we
Please.
have these venture capitalists who are kind of showing up in very big ways in the psychedelic space suddenly. And it reminds me a lot of when I was doing my digital marketing work and startup stuff, right? And it's like, okay, so I feel like there's kind of like three postures here, right? Like either they're here to like make their money and provide us a good service, which is like, a, a, a medicine, a treatment option, right? Like they get their money, like we get our healing, like energetic exchange, it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe this really is like an invitation to exit the system, like maybe this really is like a truly good thing that's happening. Like this is going to change things. And also, it does seem like people are super dissatisfied with their jobs and that productivity is dropping. So please don't let this just be another way to keep the machine running.
Right. God, thank you for mentioning that. I heard somebody say that the other day on just some random Instagram feed, and they were like, let me get this straight. So we're microdosing so we can be better efficient at our jobs. Like,
I saw that. Yes.
that's a really
Oh,
fucking good
I
point,
wanted to
man.
kiss that man. Yes.
Because no, fuck no. I want to be a better human being, right? Job's an
Yeah.
ancillary, job's an afterthought, right? That's how I survive as a human being. But we've turned job into our being, right? Our sense of being is our fucking job, and that's bullshit. I don't want to be a better human being so I can be a better work fucking animal, right? And yeah,
Totally.
I even work for myself. I only answer to myself. I don't want to be better for me. For me, I want to be better for the sake of me, not so I can have better output for me, you know?
Right. No, totally. And I feel like when, especially during like the whole last election, fake news, all the things, suddenly everybody's like, oh my gosh, it's 1984. Oh my God, cell phones. The cameras are on us. I mean, shoot, camera right here, all the things. Everybody forgets about Brave New World, though.
Yeah.
Everybody forgets about Soma and the Horgy Porgy and just basically like, let's fucking make every luxury available to these people so that they don't rebel. Like, because
Hmm.
I feel like that's kind of it's like, okay, they collected all of our data, so Orwell's chapter is done. Now we're moving on to Huxley. We're going to now provide everybody what they are missing so that they don't ask too many questions.
Yep. And then the last phase of this, which I love how you tied those two together, because I love Huxley's Brave New World. That's one of my favorite books. But the last phase of that is, remember the movie Wall-E? The little
Oh my
garbage
gosh, you're totally right.
right? And now we're all these androgynous human beings that just get
Yeah,
carted around on our fucking our space couches, and we have everything being fed to us, and our entertainment's within our own portal and all this shit. It's like now we don't even have to use our limbs; everything's just right here for us. Like fuck,
that
man.
is the dark trilogy
Yeah.
of 1984 Brave New World and Wall-E.
Wow, I feel like there should be like a research paper written about like how to tie those three concepts together because man, they really do step in stride with each other.
So, yeah, it seems like that's the cliff we're heading towards. I'm just
Wow.
really hoping that we got some good people on the wheel.
And I think we do. And talking to people like yourself, and that there's so many people out there that have a good outlook and a good mindset. That just as small as that number might be, right? One of the favorite things that somebody introduced to me recently is the one of the rules wrapped up in quantum entanglement. All right, so let's say you have an object. We'll take a sphere for this example. So you have a sphere, and 1% of that sphere starts moving in a different direction. All you need is 1% of that sphere to start moving to pull the rest of that sphere in a different direction, in that same direction, right? 1% of 8.5 billion people, right? That seems like a lot of people, but that's still 1%, right? And there's a lot of people out there that are sharing cool ideas, that are taking different types of therapies, that are doing different types of, using different types of medicines, like finding different ways to think. That 1% of 8.5 billion is getting stronger and starting to move in this one direction that starts to pull slowly the rest. And the slow movement is the allows the entropy into the new system instead of the blow it up to rebuild it kind of idea, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like there's some hope, right? There's some time, right? We're in the process. We're part of the. I don't even know if the solution's the right word, but we're part of that new remembrance of the old ways, right?
Mhm.
The new integration. And it's funny because like I have the word remember tattooed on my fingers for many reasons. One, because I feel like as human beings we figure out life a lot of times and then we get fucking ignorant and we forget that we figured it out and we go back to being depressed and anxious. But it's also that idea of the reestablishing of the member. Like you as a member of a human being, me as a member of a human being, and the more we re-establish that member, the more strength that we have as a human being to continue the work that we're doing here.
No, totally. And I mean that's like I'm honestly like a traditionally pretty private and socially anxious person, which is weird why I became a therapist. I don't know why. But that's part of the reason why I've like tried to get on this podcast and talk a couple times, like because I really do feel like I don't know who's out there who out there is listening to me talk right now, but maybe I have said one or two things that might spark or stir something that create that change in the world. Like, you know, manifestation isn't just a quiet, solitary project sometimes, especially when we're looking at big social things like this, big, big shifts in consciousness. It becomes an active process where we have to kind of like literally put that message out into the world and see the change begin to happen. Because like the things that I want to do with my career and the way that I want to see my community grow, we don't necessarily have the infrastructure or the talent or the people for those things to happen. So it's like, I'm not just going to be like, okay, well, I guess this is what I'll do for my time here on Earth. It's like, no, how can we like change the map a little bit so that that stuff is possible?
Yeah.
Like, let's all dream together, people.
Beautiful. Yes. And, you know, honestly, man, you know, as self-proclaimed introvert myself, the feedback that I've gotten from you being on my show or this show and just the way that you hold yourself has been very beautiful, right? So it's like sometimes we need to put ourselves out there to know that that it is a story in our heads, right? You know, and it might be a true story to us, but you know, there's those people out there that like you said can glean that nugget of truth from the experience that you have and the way that you can present it, because there's knowledge base out there that you're passionate about that only you can provide because of the way that the way you look at it, and in turn people will find that because they're looking for a way to somebody to bring this knowledge to them in the way that you can, whether they know it or not, right? So it's like, you know, sometimes like you mentioned being a therapist, you know, and it's funny as an introverted, but I could guarantee probably that the majority of the clients that see you are also dealing with some kind of introversion or some kind of like self-doubt, which is always the case for me. It's like, as I'm giving advice across the table, I'm also reflecting it back to myself because it's also shit that I'm going through, because that's just the way the universe fucking works.
Well, this is what I'm told makes us good healers, Adam. I wish it were easier to be a good healer.
God, man, I know. But you know, it's like we off the air, we talked about the sin eater, and one of the ideas wrapped up in the healthy version of the sin eater is the shamanic death, right? And it's experiencing death of, you know, in many different ways that you can't physically go through, so that you know how to hold space for people in those deaths that they experience. And that's not like an actual death, but like an ego death, or like, you know, a movement away from a job or an expectation that you had. You know, these reoccurring maybe letdowns in life. You know, we go through those as healers or as practitioners so that we can find our way to hold space for somebody that's going through that kind of anxious moment, depressive moment, you know, whatever that is, the loss of, you know, a loved one, whatever it is. So, yeah, there's a reason. We might not see it right away, but there is a fucking reason, man.
Well, and I mean, that was kind of a beautiful, that idea of the shamanic death, because I mean, that's really a part of why I like doing the psychedelic work, is because, like, I mean, man, this is the biggest trip. Like, everything is preparation and integration and experience.
Yeah.
I think if you can get good at the psychedelic experience, if you can get good at having those sort of experiences and integrating them, I think it just makes you better at life in a lot of ways.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that, because I've been kicking this idea around a lot for myself, and my own personal journeys with that is, you know, I think there's an underlying mission maybe that I have in life to see how chaotic I can make myself, but still keep my shit together. Right. So that can be from the hallucinogenics that I've been in to the amount of drinking I used to do. Like I find myself putting myself in these very chaotic situations, but also trying to like see how coherent I can keep my brain. Like, where are my thoughts at? Where is Adam as a human being? Where's my cognition at? Sometimes I lose it. Sometimes it's like, hey, you're on 5 grams of mushrooms and you still remember your birth date. That's pretty fucking good, man. Good for you. All right. So yeah, I echo that, man. I think there is something to that. You know, how far out there can we get ourselves but still maintain cognition?
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I don't know what the work is, what the training's for, but it seems to be a reoccurring theme for myself.
Well, I mean, what would it be like to die and then get to the other side of that and still remember everything that happened here?
Man.
I mean, is that kind of exiting? Seems like the exit.
Yeah.
So.
Huh. Wow, leaving us
Oof.
with a little nugget to think about, man.
I got lots of nuggets, man.
Definitely do, brother. Well, man, I'm so honored to talk with you about the journey that you're on
Yeah.
to catch back up and please if you're interested in anything that Jacob's offering or just want to learn more about ketamine therapies, psychedelic therapies, use the information as that jumping off point to find out more.
Mm.
But especially when you have like if you've listened to Jacob and he resonates with you, reach out to these practitioners, man. I can't stress that enough. Reach out to people, ask the questions you got, man. No, there's no dumb questions when you're talking about things that are outside of our physical understanding, right? So
Yeah. And just trying to create a space for that because, like, man, like we're all having wild experiences right now, and your experiences are welcome amongst us, you know.
yeah, most definitely.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob, thank you, brother. I appreciate you, man, and I look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Adam.
Bye, brother. Thank you so much for spending time with Jacob and I. If you'd like to find out more about what Jacob does or to maybe reach out to him directly, please check out the show notes. It's also ways you can like and subscribe to the show and support what we're doing here at Journey. Obeisance and love. We'll see you next time.